When I saw my husband flipping through my phone, my heart skipped a beat, but not from the fear of being caught. It was the dread of him seeing those messages. The ones I had forgotten to delete. I reached for the phone to snatch it away, but he was quicker. His hand pulled back, and his eyes kept scanning the screen. I could see his face changing with each message he read, and in that moment, I felt everything I had worked so hard to hide start to unravel in front of me. Yes, he was about to know the truth. But not the whole truth. His hands trembled as he scrolled down further, and I knew this was the moment. He would reach the message that would destroy everything. That one message that would explain it all or maybe make everything even more confusing. Suddenly, my phone vibrated in his hands, and a new notification flashed across the screen. I saw his face pale as he read the name of the sender. He froze. Not even blinking. I bit the inside of my cheek, an old habit when I'm nervous. My nerves were now mixed with the cold realization of what I had done. His breathing quickened. I could hear it even from 2 meters away. This was exactly what I had feared the most. Because 3 months ago, I made a mistake. A mistake that changed everything. And now, I had no idea what to do next. But let me tell you how it all happened. I never thought I'd be here. Not like this. I wasn't supposed to be the kind of woman who hid things, who betrayed the trust of the one person I had promised to love for the rest of my life. I wasn't supposed to be the kind of woman who would do this to him. But here I am. My life, for the past few years, had been a slow fade into the background. The routine, the silence that had crept into my marriage, it all seemed so familiar now. And, if I'm honest, I had become numb to it. Every morning, the same. He'd leave early for work, barely a kiss on the cheek before he was out the door. And when he returned, tired and worn from the day, he barely looked at me, let alone spoke to me. I wasn't invisible, but I might as well have been. It wasn't that we argued, no, that would have been easier. At least if we fought, I would know we still cared. But this indifference was killing me. I remember the day I realized that things had shifted for good. It wasn't a dramatic moment, not something you'd read in a romance novel. It was something small, almost insignificant. We sat down for dinner, both of us silent, both of us lost in our own worlds. I looked at him, trying to find the man I married, but I couldn't see him anymore. The man I had once fallen in love with had faded into a shadow, someone I didn't recognize. The loneliness crept in so slowly that I barely noticed until it had consumed me. I couldn't even blame him. He was busy with work, and I understood that. We both had our responsibilities, our routines. But I couldn't help feeling like I was living in a ghost town. I had become a ghost. He didn't notice when I dressed up for dinner, and I didn't notice when he looked up from his phone. There was no spark. There was nothing. I think that's when I started to look outside the marriage. Not consciously, of course. It started off small, almost imperceptible. I would smile at a passing stranger, just to feel seen. I would look at myself in the mirror and wonder who I had become. And then, one day, I found myself signing up for a photography session. It wasn't just any session, it was a creative project that promised something different. Something new. The photographer was young, vibrant, full of life. He had an energy about him that made me feel alive. He didn't know me, didn't know my history, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I had to be anyone's wife or mother. I was just me. And that feeling, that sense of being seen again, was intoxicating. The first session was awkward, of course. I wasn't used to posing in front of a camera, let alone someone as charming and confident as him. But he made it easy. He was patient, understanding. We spent hours talking about everything and nothing. The way he looked at me, the way his eyes lingered just a little longer than necessary, it made me feel like I mattered. Like I was something to be desired. It was during one of those sessions that I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something. A longing I hadn't realized I had buried under the years of routine. He wasn't just a photographer to me anymore. He became a symbol of everything I had lost, my youth, my confidence, my desire. The next few weeks blurred into one another. I found myself looking forward to every session. Every conversation. Every moment where I was no longer invisible. He made me feel alive in a way my husband hadn't for years. I knew what I was doing was wrong. I knew I was crossing a line, but I couldn't stop myself. It was like a part of me had awakened, and now that it had, I didn't want it to go back to sleep. But it wasn't just about the attention. It wasn't just about the validation. Somewhere along the way, something changed. I started to care about him. Not just the way he made me feel, but about him, about who he was. There was a depth to him that I hadn't expected. A vulnerability that mirrored my own. It was easy to lie to myself. I told myself it was just photography, just an innocent creative outlet. I told myself I wasn't really doing anything wrong. But the truth was, the more I saw him, the more I wanted him. I couldn't explain it. I didn't want to explain it. I didn't want to confront the truth that had been building up inside me for months. That I wasn't just unhappy in my marriage, I was longing for something I couldn't have. One evening, after a session, he kissed me. It wasn't something I expected, not at all. But it wasn't something I resisted either. The moment his lips touched mine, something inside me snapped. I didn't stop him. I didn't pull away. I kissed him back, and for a moment, it felt like everything that had been wrong in my life had suddenly clicked into place. But then the reality hit. I had crossed a line. A line I couldn't uncross. I had made a choice, and now I had to live with the consequences. And as I pulled away from him, I knew that there was no turning back. This was the beginning of something I couldn't control. The guilt was there, of course. It crept in, a shadow in the back of my mind, reminding me of what I was doing to my husband. But it wasn't enough to stop me. It wasn't enough to make me turn away from him. Because in that moment, I felt seen. I felt wanted. And for the first time in years, I felt alive. But now, as I sit here, waiting for the inevitable, I can't help but wonder how it all went wrong. How did I get here? What happened to the woman I used to be? And, more importantly, how am I going to face my husband when he finds out the truth? Because I know he will. I just don't know how I'll survive when it all falls apart. But let me take you back to where it all started, to the moment I made a choice that would change everything. And maybe, just maybe, you'll understand why I couldn't stop myself. I had always considered myself a woman of principles, someone who would never fall victim to temptation. But that was before I began to feel invisible, before I started to disappear inside the walls of my own home. No one warned me about the slow, silent erosion of intimacy that could turn a marriage into a hollow shell. When we first met, I remember feeling like I had found my other half. He was my partner in every sense of the word. Our life was built on mutual respect and love, or so I thought. Over the years, though, it seemed like we lost touch. Little by little, the conversations became less meaningful, the touches became less frequent, and the excitement that once existed between us had faded into a dull, predictable rhythm. I could sense it before I could name it. We were no longer in love, at least not in the way we once had been. I had grown comfortable in my loneliness, convincing myself it was just part of getting older, part of the inevitable drift that happens when you've been with someone for so long. But deep down, I knew something was missing. It was subtle at first. I started to notice things about myself. The way I would stand a little straighter when I passed by a mirror, or the way I would linger a little longer in the clothes store, wishing for someone to notice me. I hadn't felt that rush of being wanted in so long. I had forgotten what it felt like to be seen for who I truly was, not just as someone's wife, someone's mother, but as a woman. That's when I met him. I had signed up for a photography session, mostly on a whim. A new project that promised to capture me, not just in a photograph, but in the essence of who I was. I didn't know exactly what I was expecting, but I was sure of one thing: I needed a change. The first time I walked into that studio, I felt the weight of all those years of invisibility come crashing down. The photographer was young, confident, with an energy I hadn't realized I had been craving. He greeted me warmly, professionally, and I immediately felt a little at ease, despite my nervousness. The session itself was awkward, as I expected. I wasn't used to being the subject of someone else's gaze, let alone someone with such intensity. He kept asking me to relax, to move in certain ways, to express emotions I hadn't known how to show anymore. He had a way of making me feel both uncomfortable and completely alive at the same time. There was a confidence in him that I couldn't ignore. As the session went on, I found myself gradually letting go. The camera lens seemed to strip away the facade I had been wearing for so long, revealing a part of me I hadn't realized was still there. And with each shot, I felt more and more like myself again, like someone worth looking at, someone worth noticing. When the shoot ended, he offered a casual comment that caught me off guard. "You have this incredible energy, you know? You should feel that more often." I laughed, unsure of how to respond. "I don't think I have much energy left, honestly." He smiled, a knowing glint in his eyes. "You just need to let yourself feel it again. You've got it. Trust me." There was something about the way he said it, something in the way he looked at me, that made my heart skip a beat. It wasn't just flattery, it was recognition. And in that moment, I realized I had been starving for that. For someone to look at me like I was more than just a role I played in my own life. I left the studio that day feeling different. Lighter. I caught myself smiling at my reflection in the window as I walked to my car. The old, familiar feeling of being invisible was gone, replaced by something I couldn't quite explain. Over the next few weeks, I found myself thinking about him more often than I cared to admit. It wasn't just the shoot. It was the way he had looked at me, like I was something special, something worth caring about. We exchanged a few messages after that first session. It started innocently enough, talking about the photos, the lighting, the angles. But slowly, the messages became more personal. I found myself looking forward to hearing from him, to his thoughtful words and the way he seemed to understand what I was going through. It wasn't just the attention that drew me to him, it was the way he made me feel. Alive. Seen. Desired. It felt like a small rebellion, a way to reclaim a part of myself I had long since abandoned. But at the same time, it felt like a secret that was slowly taking root inside me, a secret I couldn't ignore. One evening, he suggested we meet up to discuss the next shoot. I agreed without hesitation. And when I walked into the cafe where we had arranged to meet, I realized I was nervous. Nervous, but excited. He was already there, sitting at a corner table, looking as calm and confident as ever. He greeted me with a smile that made my heart race. We talked about the shoot, but the conversation quickly drifted to more personal topics. I found myself sharing things I hadn't shared with anyone in years, how I had felt disconnected from my husband, how I had felt invisible in my own life. He listened intently, offering small, understanding nods as I spoke. There was a quiet intensity between us that was impossible to ignore. I felt like I was being drawn into something I knew wasn't entirely right, but also something I couldn't resist. As the evening wore on, the lines between our conversation and something else began to blur. He leaned in slightly, and for a moment, I thought he was going to say something. But he didn't. Instead, his eyes met mine, and the world around us seemed to disappear. In that moment, everything I had been holding back, all the tension and longing I had been trying to suppress, came rushing to the surface. I knew what was happening, I knew it wasn't right, but I also knew I couldn't stop it. And then, without warning, his lips were on mine. We kissed. It wasn't passionate or fiery, not in the way you might expect. It was slow, almost tentative, but it was enough. In that kiss, I felt everything I had been missing, the connection, the desire, the validation. It was everything I had been craving for so long. When we pulled away, there was a brief, almost uncomfortable silence. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming a little faster than it should have been. He didn't say anything at first. And neither did I. We just sat there, absorbing the weight of what had just happened. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. "I don't know why." He cut me off with a small smile. "It's okay," he said softly. "You don't have to explain yourself." I sat there, stunned, unsure of what to say next. But the truth was, I didn't need to say anything. I knew exactly what had just happened, and I knew that everything was about to change. But as I left the cafe that night, I felt an overwhelming sense of both guilt and exhilaration. I had crossed a line I never thought I would. And now, there was no going back. And yet, I couldn't help but wonder, what if this was exactly what I needed all along? What if this was the beginning of something that would finally make me feel alive again? I had never thought of myself as someone who would act impulsively. I was always the sensible one, the woman who carefully weighed her decisions, who lived by the rules. But in the weeks that followed that kiss, everything felt different. It was like stepping into a new world, one where the boundaries I had once adhered to no longer seemed so solid. Every time I thought about him, my heart would race, and a feeling of both exhilaration and guilt would wash over me. I didn't know how to make sense of it all. What was this? A fleeting moment of passion, or something more? Was it just the desire for attention, or had I truly started to care for him? The uncertainty gnawed at me, making it impossible to focus on anything else. The photography sessions continued, and with each one, I found myself drawn deeper into this strange, intoxicating connection. At first, I told myself it was nothing more than a creative outlet. I told myself that I was only trying to rediscover something about myself that had been buried under years of routine and monotony. But that excuse was getting thinner with each passing day. The lines between what was professional and personal were becoming increasingly blurred. He knew things about me that no one else did, the way I felt invisible at home, the loneliness that clung to me like a shadow. I had never shared these things with anyone, not even my husband. But with him, it felt different. It felt safe to open up, to reveal the parts of myself I had long kept hidden. There was a comfort in his presence, a sense of understanding that I hadn't felt in years. I wanted to believe that it was all just about the work, the art of photography, the challenge of creating something beautiful together. But every time we were together, the chemistry between us was undeniable. It wasn't long before our conversations shifted from professional topics to more personal ones. He started to share pieces of his own life, his struggles, his dreams, the things that made him who he was. And in those moments, I saw him not just as a photographer, but as someone who, in some strange way, understood me. He made me feel heard in a way I hadn't felt in years. But as much as I tried to deny it, the attraction between us was undeniable. I began to question what was happening to me. Was I really just looking for someone to talk to, or was I looking for something more? The thought terrified me. One evening, as I was getting ready for yet another session, I found myself staring at my reflection in the mirror. I wasn't the woman I had been when I first married. Back then, I was full of hope, of passion, of life. But somewhere along the way, I had let that woman fade. I had become a version of myself I didn't recognize, someone who had stopped fighting for her happiness. As I adjusted my outfit, trying to look presentable for the session, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to make another choice that would change everything. I wasn't ready for what I was about to face, but I knew it was coming. When I arrived at the studio, he was already there, waiting. There was a quiet confidence about him, a sense of ease that made me feel both nervous and drawn to him. We exchanged pleasantries, and then he suggested we take a break and talk for a while before we started the shoot. I agreed, though I knew it was just an excuse to delay the inevitable. As we sat down, the conversation flowed easily at first. We talked about the photos, the angles, the lighting. But then, just like before, the conversation turned more personal. It always seemed to happen that way with him. What started as small talk quickly became something deeper. "How have you been?" he asked, his eyes studying me in that way he always did, as if he could see right through me. I hesitated, unsure of what to say. There was so much I wanted to share, but at the same time, I wasn't sure I could trust myself with the truth. "I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Just a little tired, I guess." He raised an eyebrow. "Tired of what?" I took a deep breath, the weight of my own feelings pressing down on me. "Tired of pretending, I suppose." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving mine. "Pretending to be what?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked away, staring at the floor as I tried to gather my thoughts. I hadn't meant to say that. I hadn't meant to reveal that much of myself. But somehow, it had slipped out. The truth was, I had been pretending for so long that I had forgotten who I really was. "It's just, everything feels so routine," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I feel like I've lost myself somewhere along the way." There was a long pause, and then he spoke, his voice soft but firm. "You haven't lost yourself. You just need to remember who you are. You're still that person. You just have to let her out." I looked at him then, really looked at him. His eyes were intense, almost too intense, and I could feel my heart race again. There was a tenderness in his voice, but there was also something else, a longing, perhaps? It was hard to tell. But whatever it was, it made me want to get closer to him. Before I could say anything, he leaned in. Just slightly, but enough to make my breath catch. "You don't have to be alone," he said, his words hanging in the air between us. I felt a rush of emotions flood over me, desire, fear, longing. I knew what he was offering, and part of me wanted to take it. But the other part of me, the part that was still tethered to my life at home, was terrified. "I can't do this," I whispered, even though part of me wanted to. His eyes softened. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for. But you should know that you're not invisible. Not to me." And in that moment, I knew that this, whatever this was, wasn't just about photography. It wasn't just about the art. It was about something much deeper, something I wasn't ready to face, but knew I had to. Later that night, when I left the studio, I didn't feel the same. The tension, the pull between us, it had changed me. I couldn't go back to the way things were, and yet I didn't know what to do next. My mind kept circling around the same question: was this the beginning of something new, or was it just another mistake waiting to happen? I had no answers, but I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't ignore this anymore. And whatever was about to happen next, I would have to face it head-on. It was only a matter of time before my world collided with the consequences of my actions. And I wasn't sure I was ready for that. But I had already stepped too far to turn back now. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was on the edge of something irreversible. The line I had crossed had blurred so gradually that I didn't even know when it happened. One moment, I was just a woman looking for validation, and the next, I was entangled in something far more complicated than I ever could have imagined. The guilt was heavy on me, but at the same time, there was something else, a strange sense of freedom. I had never felt so alive, so aware of the world around me. Every glance, every touch, every conversation with him was like a breath of fresh air, a sharp contrast to the suffocating silence at home. I knew it was wrong. I knew I was hurting my husband. But for the first time in a long while, I felt seen. I felt noticed. I spent the next few days replaying the moment in the cafe over and over in my mind, the way he had leaned in, his breath warm against my skin, his words lingering in the air. He made me feel like I mattered. And that feeling, that desperate need to matter again, was overpowering. But there was also the creeping awareness that what I was doing wasn't just a moment of weakness. It wasn't just an isolated incident. There were real emotions involved now, on both sides. And that was terrifying. I tried to push those thoughts away, telling myself I was just having a midlife crisis, looking for something that was missing from my life. But the more I tried to rationalize it, the less I could ignore the truth. I was falling for him. The next time I saw him, I was a mess of conflicting emotions. I had told myself that I was just going to go in, do the shoot, and keep things professional. But as soon as I walked into the studio and saw him there, I knew I was lying to myself. His eyes met mine, and there was no denying the chemistry between us. I could feel it in the air, the electricity that seemed to crackle with every glance we shared. The session started as usual, but it didn't take long for things to shift. He was guiding me through poses, but his hand lingered just a little longer than necessary on my shoulder, my waist. Every touch felt like an invitation, and I couldn't resist it. My heart pounded in my chest as he looked at me, his gaze never leaving mine. "Relax," he said softly, his voice low and inviting. "You're doing great. Just let go." It was as though he could see right through me, could read the turmoil inside me, and somehow, it made me feel more exposed than I ever had before. But there was something in his voice, in his touch, that made it impossible to pull away. As the session continued, I could feel myself getting lost in it, in him. Every part of me wanted to pull back, to say no, to remind myself of who I was and what I had. But a part of me was already beyond that point. I wasn't sure who I was anymore, what I wanted anymore. And then, before I knew it, we were standing close, too close, and I could feel the heat between us, the magnetic pull. He reached out, his fingers brushing lightly across my arm, and I felt it like an electric shock, racing through my body. I knew it was wrong, but in that moment, I didn't care. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice strained, but he didn't move away. "I shouldn't have." Before he could finish, I stepped closer, closing the distance between us, and for the second time, our lips met. We kissed. It wasn't like the first time. This time, there was urgency, a rawness to it that neither of us had the power to deny. It was a kiss that said everything I had been too afraid to say, a kiss that told me I was not invisible, that I mattered. When we pulled away, I felt a flood of emotions, guilt, shame, and yet, a strange sense of relief. I couldn't deny it anymore. This wasn't just a fleeting attraction. There was something deeper here. Something I wasn't ready to face. He looked at me, his face unreadable. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was deafening, but there was also an understanding in it, an unspoken acknowledgement of what had just happened. "I can't do this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm married. I shouldn't be doing this." His eyes softened, and he took a step back. "You don't have to explain yourself," he said quietly. "But you're not alone in this. I can see what you're going through." The words hit me harder than I expected. He wasn't just a photographer. He wasn't just someone filling a void. He understood me in a way no one else did. And that scared me more than anything. I shouldn't have kissed you, I whispered, more to myself than to him. I don't regret it, he replied, his voice steady, but there was something in his eyes that told me he understood the weight of what we had just done. But I don't want to make things harder for you. I nodded, feeling the weight of my decisions pressing down on me. I didn't know what to do anymore. I didn't know how to fix this, how to undo what I had done. But I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't go back to the way things were. The truth had already started to unravel, and there was no way to piece it together again. As I left the studio that night, I felt like I was carrying the world on my shoulders. The guilt, the fear, it was all there, heavy and suffocating. But at the same time, there was a part of me that couldn't help but feel alive. For the first time in so long, I had made a choice. And now, I had to live with it. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I couldn't keep living this double life. Something had to change. I had to decide who I was, what I wanted, and where I was going from here. Because deep down, I knew that this was only the beginning. And I wasn't sure I was ready for what came next. But I had already taken the first step, and there was no turning back. The days that followed that kiss felt like a blur. I tried to go about my usual routine, keeping up the appearance of a normal life, but it was impossible to ignore the storm brewing inside me. The kiss had broken something in me, something I didn't even know existed until now. There was a part of me that wanted to shut it all down, to ignore the intense pull I felt every time I thought of him. But there was also a part of me, perhaps the part that had been neglected for so long, that was drawn to it, to him. I couldn't stop thinking about the way he had looked at me, the way he had held me, the way I had felt seen in a way I hadn't in years. The guilt was there, heavy and suffocating, but the desire to feel alive again was stronger. I spent hours going over the details in my head, how it happened, why it happened, and whether it meant anything at all. Was it just a fleeting moment of passion, or was it something more? And if it was something more, what did that mean for my marriage? I hadn't planned for any of this. I hadn't planned to feel this way. But there was no turning back. I had crossed a line, and I knew that I couldn't go back to the way things were. The weight of my actions pressed down on me as I looked at my husband that night. He had come home later than usual, as he often did. He didn't look at me the way he once did. He barely looked at me at all. He was distant, lost in his own world, just like I had been for so long. I had been waiting for the right moment, for something to change, for some kind of sign that would make everything feel like it was worth it. But now, with the reality of what I had done looming over me, I wasn't sure what that moment was. He sat down at the dinner table, as usual, without a word. His eyes scanned the papers in front of him, and I watched him, feeling like a stranger in my own home. I wanted to say something, to reach out to him, but I couldn't find the words. The space between us felt like a chasm that no words could bridge. "So," he said, breaking the silence, his voice flat. "How was your day?" It was a simple question, one that could have easily been answered with a few words. But in that moment, I realized that we had stopped having real conversations a long time ago. What was the point of talking when we no longer understood each other? "It was fine," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. There was an awkward silence between us, and I could feel the tension thickening in the air. He didn't press further, and neither did I. We ate our dinner in silence, the only sound the clink of silverware on plates. I couldn't help but think about how different it had been when we first met, when every conversation felt like an adventure, when we were excited to share our thoughts, our dreams, our fears. Now, everything felt like a routine. A routine I had grown so accustomed to, I hadn't realized how suffocating it had become. After dinner, he excused himself, as usual, retreating into his study. I watched him go, feeling a pang of something, regret, guilt, longing, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. There was a part of me that wanted to reach out to him, to tell him everything that had been weighing on my heart, but I was scared. Scared of what it would mean for our marriage, for everything we had built together. I couldn't deny that I had been distant, too. I had pulled away from him long before this had started. But now, with the weight of what I had done pressing down on me, I couldn't help but wonder if there was any way back. I went to bed that night with a heavy heart, unable to sleep, my mind racing with thoughts of him. The photographer. The man who had made me feel like I mattered again. The man who had awakened something in me that I didn't know was still there. I couldn't help but wonder if he felt the same way. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had to lose. I had a family, a life, a history with my husband. Could I really throw all of that away for a moment of passion? A fleeting connection? I had to decide what I wanted, what I was willing to sacrifice, and whether I was ready to face the consequences of my actions. The next morning, I got up early, trying to get back to some semblance of normalcy. But as I went through the motions of getting ready for the day, I realized that nothing would ever be the same. I wasn't the same person I had been just a few weeks ago. I had crossed a line, and I had no idea how to undo it. I kept telling myself that I needed to focus on my marriage, that I needed to fix what was broken between us. But every time I tried to concentrate, my mind wandered back to him. The photographer. The man who had made me feel alive, seen, wanted. I couldn't deny it any longer. I was falling for him. And that scared me more than anything. I tried to push the thought away, but it was always there, lurking in the background, like a shadow that I couldn't escape. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't keep living this lie. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. But as much as I wanted to be honest with myself, with my husband, I knew that the truth would destroy everything. And I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready to face the consequences of my actions, to deal with the fallout that would inevitably come. So I did what I always did, I buried it. I buried my feelings, my guilt, my fear, and I pretended like everything was fine. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. And sooner or later, the truth would come out. The weeks that followed were filled with an unsettling sense of tension that seemed to wrap itself around every waking moment. My mind was constantly torn between two worlds, one in which I continued to live the life I had built with my husband, and another, where everything had changed, where I was no longer invisible, where I felt seen. It was a tug-of-war I couldn't win. Every day felt like I was carrying a weight that only grew heavier. It was a burden I couldn't escape, no matter how hard I tried to focus on the normalcy of my life. It wasn't just the guilt that hung over me like a cloud, but the knowledge that everything I had been avoiding was now coming to a head. I tried to distract myself. I went through the motions, meeting friends, running errands, doing everything I could to avoid confronting the reality of what had happened. But even in the quiet moments, the truth was there, looming just beneath the surface. I could no longer deny it, I was falling in love with him. I hadn't meant for it to happen. It wasn't something I planned, something I set out to do. But with every passing day, with every encounter, it became harder to ignore the pull I felt toward him. He was the escape I had been searching for, the answer to a question I didn't even know how to ask. And yet, the guilt was unbearable. I had always prided myself on being a good wife, a good mother. But now, I was breaking the very vows I had sworn to uphold. My marriage was built on trust, on shared experiences, on a promise I had made years ago. And yet, I was slowly destroying all of that for something that seemed so fleeting, so temporary. It wasn't just about the physical attraction, although that was undeniable. It was about the connection, the emotional intimacy that had been missing from my marriage for so long. It was the feeling of being understood, of being valued. In a world where I had felt invisible, he had made me feel seen. And for that, I couldn't find it in myself to pull away. I spent my nights lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. I would hear my husband's breathing beside me, steady and rhythmic, and I would feel a pang of guilt, a sharp stab of realization that everything was wrong. He didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve the betrayal, the lies, the secrecy. But he also didn't see me. Not the way I needed to be seen. He had grown distant in the years leading up to this. We had stopped talking, stopped connecting. It was as if we had both become ghosts in our own home, existing side by side but never really living together. I had tried to reach out, to rekindle something, but nothing worked. And when I met him, when I met the photographer, it was like the spark had been reignited. For the first time in years, I felt alive. I couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, I had been searching for this all along. The excitement, the passion, the thrill of being desired again. It was intoxicating, and I couldn't stop myself. I had told myself that I was just looking for someone to talk to understand me. But now I knew it was more than that. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. One morning, as I prepared for another photo session, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my clothes, trying to make myself look presentable, trying to feel like I was still the woman I used to be. I knew I was fooling myself. I wasn't the same anymore. And neither was my marriage. I was still trying to convince myself that it was just a phase, that I was just going through something temporary. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. I had to face the truth, even if it meant facing the destruction I had caused. I arrived at the studio early that day, hoping to clear my head before the session. But when he walked in, my heart skipped a beat. The moment our eyes met, I knew that nothing had changed. The chemistry was still there, still undeniable. And in that moment, I realized that I was in too deep. We didn't talk much at first. The session began as usual, with him guiding me through poses and taking pictures. But there was an intensity in the air, a quiet tension that neither of us could ignore. The space between us seemed to shrink with every click of the camera. His gaze never left me, and I couldn't look away. He set the camera down and took a step closer, his hand brushing lightly against my arm. I felt it like a jolt of electricity, and I knew then that I was no longer in control. He leaned in slightly, his breath warm against my skin. "You're beautiful," he whispered, his voice soft but filled with something else, something more than just admiration. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words stuck in my throat. I couldn't find the right words. I didn't need to. He didn't need to say anything else. I could feel it. I could feel the pull between us, the undeniable attraction that had been building for weeks. Before I knew it, we were standing so close that I could feel the heat of his body. My heart was pounding in my chest, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, but all of them seemed to vanish as his hand reached out and cupped my face. His touch was gentle but firm, as though he had made the decision for both of us. I couldn't pull away. I didn't want to. And then, without thinking, I closed the distance between us and we kissed. It wasn't like the first time. It wasn't tentative or unsure. This time, it was intense, desperate, as if everything we had been holding back had come rushing to the surface. It was a kiss that said everything we had both been too afraid to admit. We pulled away slowly, both of us breathless, our hearts racing. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice shaky. "I didn't mean to." He shook his head, his fingers still resting gently on my cheek. "Don't apologize. I'm not sorry." I stared at him, unable to say anything more. The guilt was there, overwhelming, but there was something else too, a sense of relief, of clarity. For the first time in a long time, I knew exactly what I wanted. But as the seconds passed, reality began to sink in. I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I had made a choice, and I would have to live with the consequences. I wasn't sure what would happen next, But I knew one thing: I couldn't go back to the life I had before. It was gone. The door had been opened, and there was no closing it now. I had made my decision. Now, I would have to face whatever came next. I woke up that morning with a heaviness in my chest, a sense of foreboding that refused to leave. The events of the past few weeks had settled in me like a dark cloud, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to break. I had crossed a line, and no matter how much I tried to convince myself that everything would somehow work out, I knew deep down that it wouldn't. There was no going back now. As I sat at the kitchen table, absent-mindedly stirring my coffee, I tried to convince myself that I was still in control. I told myself that I was just living my life, making decisions that were mine to make. But in the back of my mind, I knew that I was lying to myself. Everything had changed. The truth was, I was no longer the person I had been just a few months ago. And the hardest part? I wasn't sure if I liked who I had become. I hadn't spoken to my husband about it. I couldn't. Every time I tried to picture that conversation, I was overwhelmed by a wave of anxiety. How could I explain what had happened? How could I tell him that I had given up on us? That I had found solace, and more, in the arms of someone else? The thought made my stomach turn. We had dinner together the night before. It was as if we were going through the motions of our usual routine, but neither of us was truly present. He spoke about his day, and I listened, nodding along, but the words felt hollow. The space between us felt wider than ever. The lack of connection between us had become so pronounced that it was almost suffocating. Yet, there was something I couldn't shake, an aching longing that I had suppressed for too long. I had never intended for things to spiral like this. But the more I thought about the photographer, the more I realized that I had been looking for an escape for years. I had been searching for something to make me feel alive again, to remind me of who I was before life became a series of routines and obligations. And when I met him, when I felt the intensity of his gaze, I was reminded of a version of myself I had forgotten. But I couldn't keep pretending. The more I ignored the truth, the more it consumed me. I couldn't live in this limbo forever. I stood up from the table, my hands trembling as I put my coffee cup down. I had to face this head-on. It was time to have the conversation I had been avoiding. I couldn't keep living a double life. My husband deserved the truth, and I deserved to be free of the guilt that had been weighing on me. I glanced at the clock. He would be home soon. I had no idea how I was going to say it, how I was going to make him understand, but I knew I couldn't keep going on like this. I found him in the living room when he walked through the door, his briefcase still in hand. He was tired, his eyes worn from the day. He glanced at me as he set the briefcase down, his expression unreadable. "Hey," I said, my voice cracking a little. "Hey," he replied, his tone flat. "How was your day?" I hesitated, the words stuck in my throat. I had been rehearsing this in my mind for days, but now that the moment was here, I felt paralyzed. "I need to talk to you," I finally said. His eyebrows furrowed slightly, a look of concern crossing his face. "About what?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This was it. There was no turning back now. "I've been hiding something from you," I began, my voice trembling. "Something that I don't know how to explain. But I can't keep pretending anymore. It's been eating at me." He stood silently, his gaze fixed on me, waiting for me to continue. "I've been seeing someone else," I whispered, the words barely audible. There was a long pause as his eyes widened, the shock evident on his face. He looked at me as if I had just slapped him. "You've been, what?" he asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and hurt. I nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "I never meant for it to happen. I didn't want this. But I've been feeling empty for so long. and when I met him, I don't know. I felt alive again. And I didn't know how to stop. His face hardened, the hurt in his eyes turning to anger. How long has this been going on? His voice was low, controlled, but there was an edge to it that made my heart race. About a month, I admitted. Maybe a little longer. I didn't plan any of this. It just happened. He shook his head, disbelief and hurt mixing in his expression. How could you do this? After everything? After all we've been through? I don't know, I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. I just felt like I was fading away. I felt like you didn't see me anymore. And then I met him, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I mattered. I didn't want this to happen. But it did. I could see the walls going up in his eyes. The man I had married, the man I had loved for so many years, was slipping away from me. And I had no one to blame but myself. I don't know what to say, he muttered, his voice barely audible. I don't know how to fix this. I could feel my heart breaking as I watched him retreat, the hurt in his eyes too much to bear. I'm sorry, I said, my voice breaking. I'm so sorry. He didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, feeling the weight of my actions crash down on me. I had expected him to be angry, but the silence was worse. The silence spoke volumes. And in that silence, I realized that I had just destroyed everything. I sank down onto the couch, my body trembling with the enormity of what I had done. I couldn't undo the past. I couldn't take back the choices I had made. And now, I would have to face the consequences. But the hardest part? I didn't know what came next. I didn't know how to fix this. And I didn't know if I even could. I sat there, alone in the quiet of the living room, trying to hold back the tears that had been threatening to spill for hours. The silence was deafening. My husband had left, retreated to his study, unable, or unwilling, to face me. I couldn't blame him. I had shattered something between us that couldn't be fixed with words. Not anymore. The weight of what I had confessed sat heavily on my chest, a constant reminder of how far I had fallen. The look in his eyes, anger, betrayal, and hurt, was enough to break anyone. It wasn't just that I had cheated, it was the way I had let him down. I had promised him forever, and yet here I was, unable to keep even the most basic promises I had made. I had always thought of myself as someone who valued honesty. I believed in commitment, in loyalty. I had built my life around those values. And yet, when faced with the emptiness of my marriage, I had abandoned them without a second thought. I wasn't just apologizing to him. I was apologizing to myself. Because deep down, I knew that I was the one who had let myself down. I had been searching for validation from someone else because I had stopped seeing my own worth. And now, I was paying the price. I stood up slowly, the weight of the world still pressing down on me. I had to fix this. I had to try. But I didn't know where to begin. I didn't know if it was even possible to fix what was broken. The trust, the love, it felt like it had been shattered beyond repair. I walked to the kitchen and started to prepare dinner, more out of habit than anything else. I could hear the sounds of him moving around in the other room, but we didn't speak. The silence between us was like a chasm, so deep that no words could bridge it. I couldn't help but wonder if this was the beginning of the end. If there was any way back for us. The doorbell rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of whether I should answer it. I knew it was him, he had been the only one who had reached out to me over the past few weeks. I opened the door, and there he was. The photographer. His presence was enough to stop my heart, but it was the way he looked at me, with such concern in his eyes, that made everything else disappear. I couldn't just leave it like this, he said, his voice low and soft. You don't have to do this alone. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my emotions in check. I shouldn't have called you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want to drag you into this. He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving mine. You don't need to carry this burden by yourself. I'm here for you, no matter what. I shook my head, overwhelmed by the conflicting emotions that rushed through me. I've ruined everything, I whispered, tears finally escaping from my eyes. I've ruined my marriage, my family, everything. And I don't know how to fix it. He took a step forward, gently placing a hand on my shoulder. You're not alone in this, he repeated, his words like a lifeline. For a moment, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that he could somehow make everything feel okay again. But the truth was, I had already made my choice, and the consequences of that choice were already unfolding. I don't know what I'm doing anymore, I confessed, my voice breaking. I don't know how to make this right. I don't know how to fix the mess I've made. He looked at me with such tenderness, his expression softening. You don't have to fix everything all at once. You just have to start. But how? How could I ever begin to repair the damage I had done? I had hurt the one person who had stood by me through everything, the person who had given me everything. And now, I was the one responsible for tearing it all apart. I pulled away, wiping my tears with the back of my hand. I'm sorry, I whispered, feeling the weight of those words, knowing they would never be enough. I shouldn't have brought you into this. He didn't say anything for a moment, just stood there, watching me with those familiar, understanding eyes. And then, as if he had come to a decision, he reached out, gently cupping my face in his hands. I don't want to see you suffer, he said, his voice calm but firm. But you need to make a decision. You can't keep living in two worlds. It's tearing you apart. I knew he was right. I couldn't keep living this lie, pretending that everything was fine when I knew it wasn't. I had to choose. And no matter how hard it was, no matter how much it hurt, I knew I had to face the consequences of my actions. I've hurt so many people, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I don't know if I can live with myself. You're only human, he said softly, brushing a strand of hair from my face. We all make mistakes. The important thing is what you do next. I closed my eyes, letting his words wash over me. It wasn't just about the mistake. It was about what came after. It was about whether I could find a way to make amends, to repair what had been broken. I have to talk to him, I said finally, my voice steady for the first time in days. I have to face him, face what I've done. The photographer nodded, his expression sympathetic but resolute. That's the first step, he said. You can't fix this by running away. You have to face it head on. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of resolve wash over me. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be painless. But it was the only way forward. As he turned to leave, I felt the weight of everything I had done still pressing down on me. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was ready to face it. I had made my bed, and now I had to lie in it. I wasn't sure what the future held, or whether my marriage could be saved. But one thing was certain, I had taken the first step. And that, for now, was all I could do. The days after that conversation were a blur of emotions. I had spent so long hiding behind walls, behind excuses, that the moment I started to face the consequences of my actions, everything felt too real, too painful. The guilt that had been a constant companion now felt suffocating, a weight that pressed down on me every minute of every day. But it was also a reminder that I couldn't keep running from what I had done. I had made a choice, and now I had to live with it. I woke up every morning with the same thought, today, I will tell him everything. I will face the man I've betrayed, and I will face the truth of what I've done. But every day, something stopped me. Maybe it was fear. Fear of his reaction, fear of losing him forever, or perhaps the fear that he might never forgive me. The silence between us was unbearable, like a thick fog that we couldn't escape. We shared the same house, the same space, but we were strangers. Every time I looked at him, I saw the man who used to be my partner, the man I once loved with all my heart. But now, all I could see was the hurt in his eyes, the confusion, the anger. And every time I saw that look, I was reminded of the one person I had failed him. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. The photographs, the stolen moments, they were just distractions. The truth was, I had been running away from something deeper than just a moment of weakness. I had been running from the reality of my own unhappiness, from the loneliness that had eaten away at me for years. And I realized, as the days passed, that the person I had hurt the most wasn't just my husband. It was me. I had stopped seeing myself, stopped valuing who I was outside of my roles as a wife and mother. I had let myself become invisible, and in doing so, I had allowed my marriage to become a mere shell of what it once was. I spent hours replaying everything that had happened, everything I had said. The moment I kissed him, the moment I told my husband the truth, it was as if my life had been split into two parts. One part was the woman who had let herself feel something again, who had let herself believe that she could be more than just someone's wife. The other part was the woman who had broken her vows, who had shattered the trust that had taken years to build. And now, I had to choose between the two. My husband had become a ghost in our own home, his silence louder than any argument could ever be. He had withdrawn completely, and I had no idea how to reach him. He wasn't angry, at least not in the way I had expected. His anger was quiet, a simmering resentment that seemed to grow with each passing day. It was like he was waiting for me to fix everything, to make things right. But how could I do that when I wasn't sure if I could even fix myself? The guilt weighed on me like 1,000 pounds, each day heavier than the last. I wanted to make things right, but I didn't know where to start. I had done something unforgivable, and I wasn't sure I could earn his forgiveness. I wasn't sure I deserved it. The photographer kept reaching out, his messages a reminder of the pull I still felt toward him. But I knew, deep down, that I couldn't go back to him. He had become a symbol of the escape I had been searching for, but he wasn't the answer. The answer, I realized, was inside me. I had to face myself first before I could face anyone else. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but I made the decision to speak to him, my husband. I couldn't keep living this lie, and I couldn't keep hiding from the truth. I had to face him. I had to face what I had done and take responsibility for it, no matter how much it hurt. I found him sitting in his favorite chair, a glass of whiskey in hand. He didn't look at me when I walked into the room, but I knew he knew I was there. There was something about the way he held himself, the way his shoulders were hunched, that told me everything I needed to know. He was broken. And it was my fault. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion. "I should have told you sooner. I should have never let it get this far." He didn't respond at first. He just stared at the glass in his hand, his jaw clenched. I could feel the tension radiating off of him, and it made me want to turn away, to walk out of the room and never look back. But I couldn't do that. Not this time. "I've betrayed you," I continued, my voice shaking. "I've hurt you in ways I can never take back. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I am truly sorry." He looked up at me then, his eyes dark and distant. "I don't know how to look at you anymore," he said, his voice quiet but filled with so much pain. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again." "I understand," I whispered, my heart breaking. "I don't expect you to. But I need you to know that I regret everything I've done." I don't want to live with this guilt. I don't want to keep hiding. There was a long pause, and I could feel his eyes on me, searching for something, maybe an explanation, maybe an apology that was enough to erase everything. But there was no way to erase the past. There was only the truth, and that truth was staring at both of us in the face. I don't know what to do with you, he said after a moment, his voice rough. I don't know what to do with us. I felt the weight of his words like a slap to the face. I didn't have an answer. I didn't have a solution. All I had was the truth, and I was finally ready to face it. I'm sorry, I said again, my voice barely audible. I'm so sorry for everything. And with that, the silence stretched out between us, thick and suffocating. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if there was any way to repair the damage I had done. But I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't keep living in this limbo. It was time to face the consequences, no matter how hard they were. It was the hardest conversation I had ever had. And yet, I knew it was only the beginning of something far more painful. But it was also the only way forward. The silence that followed that conversation lingered, thick and suffocating. I had confessed, I had apologized, and yet there was no immediate relief. No sudden moment of understanding or forgiveness. Instead, the space between us seemed to widen, each second making it more difficult to breathe, more difficult to hold on to any semblance of the life we once had. I had expected anger. I had expected shouting, accusations, tears. But all I got was silence, a silence that stretched on for hours, filling the space where words should have been. My husband had gone quiet in a way that I had never seen before. He wasn't angry. He wasn't crying. He was just absent. It was terrifying. I stayed in the living room, sitting on the couch, my hands clenched in my lap. I couldn't leave. I couldn't go back to him without facing what I had done. But I also couldn't sit here, waiting for the inevitable fallout. When the night came, I went to bed, still alone. He had retreated to the study again, as he had been doing for days, not saying a word, not even acknowledging me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of him, of the life we had built, and of the life I had destroyed. I thought about the photographer. I thought about the way he had made me feel, the way he had made me believe in myself again. But I knew that I couldn't go back to him. I couldn't undo what had been done. The affair, the lies, it was all part of a pattern that had been brewing for years. And now, I had to face it. I had to face what I had become. In the early hours of the morning, I heard footsteps coming down the hall. My heart skipped a beat as I heard the door creak open. My husband stood in the doorway, looking at me, his face unreadable. I'm not sure what to say, he said, his voice low, almost as if he was speaking to himself. I sat up, wiping the tears from my face. I know I've ruined everything. I know I've hurt you. But I need you to know that I didn't want this. I never meant for any of this to happen. He didn't respond right away. He just stood there, watching me. And then, finally, he spoke, his words slow, deliberate. I don't know if I can forgive you, he said, his voice cracking. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. You've taken something from me that I can't get back. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew he was right. Trust, once broken, was nearly impossible to rebuild. And I had broken it in the worst possible way. I know, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know how sorry I am. How much I regret what I've done. He looked at me for a long moment, his expression softening just slightly. I don't know if I can do this anymore, he said. I don't know if I can keep living like this. You've taken something from me that I don't know how to get back. I could see the pain in his eyes, and I knew that he wasn't just talking about the affair. He was talking about everything we had lost. The years of silence, of distance, of unmet needs. I had been so focused on my own unhappiness that I had failed to see his. I'm sorry, I repeated, my voice breaking. I don't know how to make this right. But I'll do whatever it takes. I'll do whatever you need. He stood there for a moment, silent, before he spoke again. I don't know what I need. I don't know if I can forgive you. But I do know one thing, we can't keep living like this. Something has to change. His words hung in the air between us, heavy and final. I could feel the distance between us, stretching wider with every passing second. I knew he was right. We couldn't keep going on like this. Something had to change. But I didn't know what that change would look like. I didn't know if it was even possible to fix what I had broken. I don't want to lose you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I don't want to lose you. He looked at me, his eyes filled with pain and uncertainty. I don't know if it's even possible to fix this, but I'll try. I'll try to figure out if there's a way forward. But it's going to take time. And I don't know if you'll be able to wait for me. The words stung, but they were the truth. I had to face the reality of what I had done. I had to face the consequences of my actions, no matter how much they hurt. I'll wait, I said, my voice steady. I'll wait for as long as it takes. But I will never stop trying to make this right. He nodded, his expression softening just a little. I don't know what the future holds, he said. But I do know this, we can't keep living like this. We have to make a choice. The silence that followed was thick with uncertainty, with the weight of everything we had lost. But I could feel something shifting, something tentative, something fragile. Maybe it was the first step toward healing, or maybe it was just a temporary truce. Either way, it was a start. We didn't say anything else that night. He went back to his study, and I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything that had just happened. I didn't know what the future held for us. I didn't know if we could ever go back to the way things were. But I knew one thing for sure, I had to try. For him, for me, for us. I couldn't undo the past, but I could work toward something better. And that's what I was determined to do. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be quick. But it was the only way forward. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was ready to face whatever came next.